Iran moved first. Fast boats surged into the narrow Strait of Hormuz, cutting across the path of a U.S. Navy escort, their wakes closing distance faster than anyone expected. In one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth, there was no room for error, only seconds between pressure and escalation. For a moment, it looked like the U.S. destroyer was being boxed in, forced to react as the swarm tightened around a vulnerable tanker. The momentum felt one-sided, like control was slipping. But that was only what could be seen. Because while the pressure was building on the surface, the real question had already changed. Was the U.S. losing control? Or had the outcome already been decided? Chapter 1. Crisis Entry. The destroyer held its course, cutting through the narrow channel. Gray hull, steady radar sweeping escort position locked beside the tanker. Ahead, the tanker moved heavy and slow, fully loaded. Steel mass confined to a corridor barely wide enough to breathe. Civilian traffic crowded the lane. Cargo ships, smaller vessels, all sharing the same constrained water. Then the first contacts appeared. Fast boats. Small signatures accelerating hard from the northern edge of the channel. Wakes began to form behind them, sharp and deliberate. Not drifting, not random. Closing. Inside the destroyer, nothing changed on the surface. No sudden turn, no visible escalation. But the distance was collapsing. The boats spread slightly as they advanced, adjusting angles. Not a swarm yet, but enough to force attention. The tanker couldn't maneuver, too large, too slow, trapped in its lane, and the destroyer. It didn't move, no warning shots. No visible attempt to push the boats back. From the outside, it looked like hesitation. The gap narrowed again. Civilian vessels drifted dangerously close to the developing line of approach. Any reaction now risked drawing them into the path. The boats accelerated further, engines pushing harder into the confined space, now clearly inside a range that mattered, close enough to be seen, close enough to be felt. Still, the destroyer held position. No aggressive maneuver, no visible change in formation, just steady course. And that was the part no one watching from the outside understood. Because if the threat was this obvious, if the approach was this direct, why wasn't the most powerful navy in the world doing anything about it? Chapter 2. Strategic gamble. The boats accelerated again. Not one direction, multiple vectors converging at once. What had been a loose approach was now expanding into something wider. More hulls entered the corridor. More wakes cut across the tanker's projected path. The pressure wasn't just increasing, it was spreading. Boats moved ahead of the tanker, then curved back across its bow in tight arcs. Others slid along the flanks, matching speed before cutting inward again. They weren't chasing a target, they were shaping the lane itself. Inside that narrow channel, space was becoming the weapon. The tanker couldn't react. Too much mass, too little room to turn. Its course was fixed long before this moment, and the destroyer still held position. No sudden acceleration, no intercept vector breaking toward the nearest contact. Just steady escort. From the outside, it felt like momentum had shifted. The boats pressed closer, tightening their angles. Distances that had been measured in hundreds of meters were now collapsing into seconds. A fast craft cut sharply across the tanker's bow, close enough to force attention, but not enough to trigger collision. Another slipped between vessels in the traffic lane, threading through civilian ships like moving cover, and that changed the risk completely, because now any response wasn't just about the boats. It was about everything around them. Cargo vessels drifted within the same space, uninvolved but suddenly part of the equation. A warning shot here could become something else entirely. A maneuver here could push the danger outward. The boats understood that. They adjusted again. One group surged forward, then slowed just enough to force the tanker into a tighter visual corridor. Another group crossed behind, closing off any clean maneuvering path. It wasn't random pressure. It was controlled interference. Each movement reduced options. Each pass narrowed the margin for response. And for a moment, it looked like it was working. The destroyer remained steady. No visible attempt to push the boats away. No escalation into warning fire. Just continued forward movement through an increasingly unstable space. From the outside, it looked like hesitation again, like a force being forced to wait. But the boats didn't slow. They pushed harder into the formation. Another near pass across the tanker's bow, closer than before. Another cut between vessels, faster, tighter, more deliberate. The entire encounter compressed further. What had been distance was now proximity. What had been pressure was now constraint. And inside that constraint, the decision window was shrinking. Because every second without action made the situation harder to control, or at least that's what it looked like. The boats adjusted again, holding just inside that dangerous range. Not colliding, not withdrawing, holding the line where reaction becomes unavoidable. And that was the real move. They weren't just closing distance, they were forcing timing. Forcing a moment where the destroyer would have to choose. Act too early. Risk escalation. Act too late. Risk losing control entirely. The space for clean decisions was disappearing. And from the outside, it felt like the initiative had already changed hands. Because if the destroyer could act, why hadn't it? They weren't just getting closer, they were forcing a decision. Chapter 3. Hidden battlefield picture. The wakes are no longer random. They begin to trace the same arcs again, cutting across the tanker's path with a rhythm that repeats. On the surface, it still looks chaotic. Boats accelerating, veering, circling pressure without a clear pattern. But inside the destroyer, the picture is changing. Contacts that once flickered now hold steady on the radar screen. Each track stabilizes, each movement logged, compared, predicted. And that's when the shift begins. Because repetition is not chaos, it's structure. The operators don't speak loudly, they don't need to. Their eyes stay fixed on the display as the same angles appear again. Approach from port, break across the bow, fall back to distance, then repeat, and again, and again. What looked aggressive starts to look familiar, and that familiarity is the first sign of control. Outside, another fast boat cuts sharply inward, its wake slicing close to the tanker's hull. The distance collapses again, too close, too fast, but the destroyer does not move. No sudden turn, no escalation, no visible reaction. And that restraint is not hesitation, it's calculation. Because by now the pattern is no longer forming. It's already understood. Every new movement fits into something already seen. Every approach angle confirms what was suspected seconds earlier. And that changes everything. Because pressure only works when it stays unpredictable. The moment it repeats, it can be read. And once it can be read, it can be anticipated. Inside the Combat Information Center, timing becomes clearer. Intervals shorten, then reset. Distances close, then widen. Not randomly, deliberately, and that's when the officers stop watching individual boats. They start watching the system. Because this isn't just a swarm, it's a method. A way to force reaction, a way to compress time, a way to create decision pressure without crossing a clear line. But something else is happening. The destroyer isn't reacting to each move anymore. It's waiting for something specific, something that hasn't happened yet. Because understanding the pattern doesn't mean acting immediately, it means choosing when to act. Outside, another approach. Closer this time, tighter angle, less margin. The tanker holds course. The lane remains crowded. Civilian vessels still move unpredictably just beyond the formation. The risk hasn't gone away. If anything, it's sharper now, because the pattern is tightening. And that tightening isn't just pressure, it's a build toward something. Inside the ship, no one says it out loud, but they can see it. The repetition is accelerating, the geometry is closing, the space is shrinking, and all of it is leading somewhere, but still no order is given, no escalation, no visible response, just observation, just confirmation, just waiting. And that waiting is not passive, it's deliberate delay, because acting too early would break the pattern before it reveals its full shape, and that shape is what matters. Outside, the boats continue their cycle, closer, faster, more confident, because from their side, nothing has changed. The destroyer still holds position, still silent, still restrained. And that silence looks like uncertainty. But it isn't. It's clarity. Clarity that isn't being used yet. And that's the part no one outside the ship can see. They already understand what's happening. They can see the pattern. They can predict the movement. They know where this is going. So why wait? Chapter 4, the reversal. The boats surge again, this time closer than before, their wakes overlapping into a single tightening ring. Distance collapses to seconds. Angles narrow. The space around the tanker begins to compress. What was once movement now becomes density. More hulls inside the same water. More crossings, tighter turns, less room for error with every passing second. And that's when it happens. Not outside. Inside the destroyer. Because the moment the swarm reaches that density, the pattern is no longer forming. It's complete. Every contact now sits exactly where it was expected. Every approach vector matches the earlier cycle. Nothing new is happening, and that's the signal, because unpredictability has vanished. Each boat, once a separate threat, is now part of a fixed geometry. Distances are known, speeds are measured, paths are no longer guesses. They're solutions. Inside the combat system, the picture locks. Not gradually, all at once. Tracks align, timelines sync. Movement becomes forecast. And with that, something shifts. The swarm isn't controlling the encounter anymore. It's being mapped. Every boat now fits into a single structure, a structure that can be read, timed, and predicted, and that changes the balance. Because once movement becomes predictable, it stops being pressure. It becomes vulnerability. Outside, another boat cuts across the bow closer than any before. Its wake rolls hard against the tanker's path, forcing a narrow correction. From the surface, it looks like dominance, like the swarm has taken control. But inside the destroyer, no one reacts to the moment. Because that move was already expected. Its timing, its angle, its speed, all of it already accounted for. And that's the reversal. Not a sudden action. Not a dramatic response. A shift in who understands the battlefield. Because now every boat can be tracked simultaneously. Every path can be intersected. Every approach can be countered. The geometry is locked. The solution is complete. And for the first time, the destroyer holds something different. Not just awareness. Control. Real control. The kind that comes from knowing exactly what will happen next. And more importantly, when. Because timing is now predictable. Seconds mapped out. Movements anticipated before they even begin. Inside the system, every boat has a place. Every action has a response. Nothing is uncertain anymore. The swarm has reached maximum pressure, and in doing so, it has revealed everything. But then nothing happens. No command is given, no engagement order, no escalation. The destroyer holds position just as it did before. The tanker continues forward. The civilian traffic still crowds the lane. The narrow waterway offers no margin. And despite everything, the control, the clarity, the complete targeting picture, the situation does not change. Because control is not the same as permission. Every boat may be predictable. Every movement may be understood. But the rules have not shifted. The risk is still there. Too many vessels, too little space, too many consequences, and acting now would mean crossing a line that cannot be undone. So the system holds, fully ready, fully aware, fully capable, and completely restrained. Outside, the boats continue their passes, unaware that the pattern has already been solved, unaware that their movement no longer creates pressure. But still they remain inside the lane, still inside range, still inside the geometry that has already closed around them. And that's the paradox. Because at the exact moment the destroyer gains control, it loses the ability to use it. They had control, but couldn't use it. Chapter 5. Strategic Consequence. The boats begin to peel away, not all at once, but in fragments, one breaking off then another. The tight geometry loosens. The circle around the tanker starts to stretch, then slowly dissolve. Distance returns. Not safely, but noticeably. The closest passes stop first. The sharp crossings fade. Engines throttle back as the swarm drifts outward. It looks like an ending, but it isn't, because nothing was decided. No warning shots, no forced retreat, no clear moment where one side took control. Just movement. Slowing. And that matters. The destroyer holds its course exactly as before. No sudden turn, no pursuit. The tanker continues forward, still inside the narrow lane, still surrounded by civilian traffic that never truly cleared. The danger hasn't disappeared. It's just less visible. And that's the difference. Because the swarm was never defeated. It disengaged. on its own terms, at its own pace, without being forced out of the space it had entered. And that leaves something behind. Uncertainty. Because the same boats that pressed inward minutes ago are still out there, still within reach, still capable of returning to the same pattern. Nothing has removed them. Nothing has changed the conditions that allowed this to happen. And inside the destroyer, that reality is clear. The system resets, tracks widen, spacing increases, but the understanding remains. They know the pattern now. They know the timing. They know exactly how the pressure was built and how it could be built again. But knowledge alone didn't end the encounter, because there was no moment where action crossed into escalation. No threshold where response became unavoidable. And that's where the gap appears, between control and what can be done with it. Because control existed, the pattern was solved, the geometry was locked, every movement understood, but none of it translated into decisive action. The environment didn't allow it. Too many vessels, too narrow a corridor, too many consequences attached to a single misstep. And beyond that, something else was missing. Not capability, not awareness, support. Because escalation in that moment would not stay contained inside the waterway. It would spread, politically, strategically, regionally. And without others standing inside that same decision, the cost would not be shared. So the destroyer continues its escort not as a show of dominance, but as a controlled passage through an unresolved space. The tanker moves forward. The lane remains crowded. The risk never fully disappears. And the encounter does not truly end. It pauses, waiting for the next movement, the next approach, the next moment when pressure builds again. Because nothing fundamental has changed. And that's the conclusion most people never see. This wasn't dominance. It was limitation. Closing paragraph. At the beginning, it looked like pressure. Fast boats closing in distance, collapsing a narrow waterway, turning dangerous by the second. It felt like the initiative had already shifted. But by the time the pattern revealed itself, the outcome had already changed. The swarm moved first, but the destroyer understood first. Control didn't come from action. It came from knowing exactly when action was no longer needed. And that was the gap. Not between strength and weakness, but between what could be done and what could not be risked. Because in that moment, the encounter wasn't decided by who could act faster. It was decided by who could see further. Out in the strait, the water settles again. The tanker moves forward. The destroyer holds its line. And the space that once looked contested never actually left its control.